let's get into anti-crime. You're there. You've made the big time. That's where you want to be. What are you working on?
Well, I'm trying to get the best collars I could. You want to get quality collars. And quality collars back then, being a street guy, you want to get guns and robberies. Those are, well, obviously homicides and stuff, but we didn't run into that many of them. Guns and robberies are there all the time.
Mhm.
And those are the two things that lead to homicides.
Yeah.
So when you're getting those, when you take a gun off the street, you're stopping someone from being shot later on or killed.
Yeah.
And you want to get these quality arrests that you pick up on your own. Now, we don't respond to radio calls. We don't pick them up, but we do back them up. You know, you're working in a precinct. You know it's a rough precinct. You know there's violence and cops are a danger. So if a unit picks up, a uniform officer picks up a radio call and there's no other units available because everyone's busy, we would say 4-1 anti-crime team will back up Sector Eddie. You know, you don't want guys going alone. And we would back up our brother officers in uniform. So that's what we would do. But you want to get out there in anti-crime and make the best arrest you could. That's our job. And I like doing it. And I wanted to go out every day and get a gun or a robbery collar.
So I think this is before you get promoted to first grade detective.
No, I didn't make first grade.
No,
I got third.
Oh, sorry. Before third grade. I apologize.
Yeah, it runs the other way.
Yeah.
3,
so
2,
there was
1.
a story that you told in the book where you had made, I think it was called a bribery. But anyway, you were scouting out this thing and it looked like people were taking bets. And anyway, you arrested this guy and brought him in. You made your boss look good. You remember that story?
Well, I always made my boss look good. You know, that's another part of the job you got to do.
Yeah.
You always got to make your boss look good.
Yeah.
And making my boss look good had a lot of advantages to me.
Yeah.
Now, give you an example.
Okay.
I was allowed to go to court. I didn't like going to court. No one likes the paperwork in the court part.
Yeah.
And you'd have to go to court, you do a day shift, right? So you'd have to do an 8 to 4, and then you'd be stuck in court all day, right? Because the judge didn't come in till like 9:30. They hear the private lawyers first. Then lunch comes. Next thing you know, it's 2, 3 o'clock. You get back and you go home. So when I worked out with my bosses, they would let me go to court. We didn't have cell phones, but I would be home. So I would say, my boss would let the DA call me when my case was coming up, and I wouldn't have to go to the precinct and start my shift. They would start when I got to the court. So the DA would call me because they knew us. When you were an active cop, the DAs know you because they would see you every day.
Mm-hmm.
So they would call me at home, and I would report straight to the courthouse and start my shift then. So if they called me at 10 o'clock, my shift would start 11 o'clock at the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would get in before lunch, and I could come back and make an arrest. Or if it wasn't going to be until after lunch, they would call me during lunch and say, well, your case is coming up after lunch. So I'd start like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and I'd be in the court from 1 to 4 or 2 to 4. And then I could be on the street the rest of the hours and make an arrest.
Yeah.
So my bosses let me do that because first I was making them look good, and they trusted me to go to the court and do what I had to do.
Yeah.
That was one thing. The second thing is being a detective, detectives dressed up, but I never got dressed. I never wore a suit and tie or jacket. They would let me come in and wear my street clothes and let me get away with that for 90% of the time. And what they did was when they assigned me cases, I started out working with detectives, but then they let anti-crime guys work with me. They would assign to me all the robberies, and I would work with anti-crime cops, and I would be able to dress the way I wanted. They let me do that, and which was a big plus because I didn't like clothes, you know, getting dressed up clothes.
Well, this was a story that you had been watching something going on through a window. It looked like the guy was taking bets. You brought him in. You weren't even sure what the guy had done, and there was a suit that was in the precinct, and he came up to you and goes, "Do you know who you are?"
I'll tell you. This is when I was really a rookie.
Okay.
It was way back. I was in uniform on foot, and I saw a guy taking what's called policy, right? And policy is numbers,
Okay.
right? And that's, he was doing it in a bodega, which is a grocery store in the ghetto. So I saw him doing this, and I watched him for a while. Now I knew it was illegal, but I didn't know how to express it. So I came into the precinct, right, and I brought it before a desk, and the desk officer then, he said, "Kid, you know what you got?" I said, "Well, I know it's against the law," and they would help you. Desk officers were usually a sergeant or a lieutenant, and because after a while, years later, way after, they had cops on the desk. I think they're back to sergeants and lieutenants now, but they would guide you in what you had. So I was a rookie and I didn't know what I had. So he came out from behind the desk, took me behind, and he told me how to testify and what I did. And then I was processing the prisoner, and there was a boss there. He was a deputy inspector, which was one rank over a captain, and he was in charge of the precinct. And he came over to me and said, he says, "Hey, kid, you know what you got here?" And I said, "No." He says, "You got a KG." So I didn't know what that was. I said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "Yeah, you got a KG. You know what that is, right?" I said, "No." He says, "That's a known gambler." And he took me back in the room, and there was like a bulletin board with a pull-down shade on it. And he pulls it up, and his picture was there. And that was a known gambler. So he was like arrested a lot of times. And this boss specifically liked it because he was trying to get into PMD. That's the Public Morals Division. You either handled vice or drugs, right? So he wanted to get into this vice stuff. And getting known gamblers made him look good. So he says, "This is a good collar, kid. This is a good collar. I'm going to give you a day off." And back then they could give you a day off. I think it was called, I think it changed names over the years, but like a commander's day. You did something outstanding, they give you a day off. They had the authority and the power to do this. This was old policing. This is 1970s, 50 years ago,
Yeah.
54 years ago. So he was very happy about it. I didn't even know what I had. I just knew it was against the law. But the lieutenant helped me, and the captain, the DI, deputy inspector, he gave me a day off. He said, "Great collar, kid."